last year in fantasy football. Many fantasy players let us down. Are we willing to forgive them and draft them again this year? Let's unpack it. This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast. Together, we'll unpack fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson, your fantasy coach, joined today by a special guest co-host, Garret Price from Dynasty Nerds. We are here to encourage you and help you win while you play fantasy football with purpose. As we provide fantasy advice, we won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking the Ministry studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are fired up for a special edition of this Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast as we prepare you for your fantasy drafts and prepare for the season. We also encourage you to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com and become a member for free today. We provide fantasy concepts that relate to life and faith all season long, designed for your league to operate as a small group and get together for league meetings all throughout the season. And so you can utilize this at your church or your home league or your neighborhood league, whatever it may be. We want you to have this content for free. And so check out the content on fantasyfootballfellowship.com and become a free member today. On today's show, our breakout is all about forgiveness in fantasy and in life, and we will get to that topic momentarily. And we'll also, at the end of the show, talk about some other rookies that we are targeting in fantasy drafts this year, and also second-year guys, because our guest co-host today is a Dynasty expert. That means he keeps a close eye on the young players that are coming into this league. And so let's say hello to our guest today. He's the co-owner and head of content for Dynasty Nerds, dynastynerds.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Dynasty Price. Garret, great to have you on the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, man, we're psyched to have you. We've been connected for a number of years and thrilled to have you on the podcast today. And we'll kind of get to know you a little bit. And so I know that your faith is important to you. And so I'm curious, as you follow Jesus, what does that look like from the standpoint of life? But even how does that affect how you pursue fantasy football as a manager, but also as an expert?
Yeah. It's something that when I first started getting into fantasy football, I had no idea where it was going to go. I had no idea what direction this was going to take. I knew I enjoyed playing. I knew I enjoyed, writing up little things for my own home leagues. And so who knew where it was going to go? And now it's, kind of taken off to a point where this is what I do full time, which is bonkers. Like the fact that many people want to listen is super cool. But I knew that now I have a platform that I didn't have before. And ultimately, everything I do, whether it's parenting, my marriage, hanging out with friends, work life, and then specifically down to what I do with fantasy football, I knew that I wanted everything I do to be through the lens of how can I glorify the kingdom? How can I glorify God in what I'm doing? And so, trying to find little ways to do things. Sometimes it's just as simple as, how I interact in the community and how I, check what I say and how I talk. And then sometimes it's as big as doing things like faith and fantasy football, where I'm doing devotionals while I'm talking about fantasy football concepts. And, so it can be all over the map, but ultimately that's what I aim to do. And sometimes I do that so well. And other times I bomb and I have to go back and apologize later. And so, it still has its ebbs and flows and whatnot, but that's the goal, is to glorify God in every little thing that I can do.
Amen. I love it. That's awesome. We'll keep shining the light in the fantasy community and People are watching, that's for sure. So from a fantasy perspective, so your site, dynastynerds.com, very focused on the Dynasty platform format in fantasy. And so I dabble a little with Dynasty. I'm in multiple leagues of all sorts of different
Sure.
formats. But you've gone all in on Dynasty. Why is that? What drew you
Yeah.
to that format?
So even as a little kid, I was the guy that I would take like baseball cards and football cards and basketball cards, and I would line them up and I would create teams, and then I would write down stats of like the games that they play, like not even real games, like games I made up that they played. And then the NCAA football game just came back out after more than 10 years. But even when I was playing that as a kid, I would play the game some, but I cared way more about recruiting the players and building up the dynasty and all of these kind of things. So from a young age, I was really in that mindset of I always wanted to be like a GM. I always wanted to be like a GM. And I didn't even fully knew I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I think dynasty is probably for most of us average Joes the closest we'll ever get to being able to be a GM. Because as much as I do enjoy redraft, and I genuinely do, I play in a couple redraft leagues that is fun. There's something that goes next level with Dynasty, because if you bomb that startup, well, now I'm in a hole for the next couple of years that I got to figure out how to dig myself out of, because I don't get to redraft a brand new crop of players next year. This is my team. So either from rookie drafts, the new incoming rookies, or by making trades, I have to figure out how to dig myself out of this. Or conversely, there's you do an amazing job of preparing preseason, and you get a guy in the ninth round that ends up being a stud, and you're like, but next year he goes to somebody else and I don't get him anymore.
That's right.
So I think for me, I think it's that small taste of being a GM is what really compels me to want to play in more and more dynasty leagues.
It's fun. All right. And you're helping dynasty managers all over make the right decisions. So encourage people to check out dynastynerds.com. All right. So we're gonna jump into today's breakout here on the podcast. And so Garrett's gonna help us unpack this topic today. And it's this topic of forgiveness, because it happens in fantasy, it happens in life. And so we're gonna take a look at some players who let us down last year. Some of these, maybe players that we drafted personally, or they just let the fantasy community down, because going into last year's draft, we had high hopes for them. We drafted them, early or in a specific round where we thought there was going to be value. And then those players did not live up to those expectations. And now we find ourselves in a spot. Are we willing to forgive them and draft them again? Or are we going to hold a grudge and say, I'm never drafting him again. I can't forgive him. Forget it. I'm done with him. And so let me give you a couple names, and then you can jump in, Garret, as well. So for me, I was on the hype train for Tony Pollard last year, and he was a big letdown. And so I'm debating whether or not to forgive him. All right. Also, was a huge Austin Ekeler guy. Big letdown last year. Now he's on a new team, so we have to figure out with him. And then, oh man, all about AJ Dillon. Whew, huge letdown once again. And I can make that very clear. I will never draft him again. I am out on AJ Dillon. So there's a few names. What about for you? Who comes to mind? We're talking mainly redraft here, but
Sure.
But who comes to mind?
Yeah, a guy that was a little disappointing last year, and he had the contract stuff and then some injury stuff. Former number 1 overall running back for fantasy football purposes, and Jonathan Taylor. He was a guy that let some fantasy managers down quite a bit last year. Kyle Pitts is another one for me. Obviously freak talent, amazing ability, but was just in a really, really difficult offense last year. So I would say those two are probably the biggest ones that come to mind for me, but there's plenty of other players that we could throw out there. T. Higgens comes to mind as well. You could argue, like, was Josh Jacobs a disappointment or not? So yeah, there's definitely quite a few players that would fall into this category.
All right. Is there somebody kind of all time that you drafted one time and you said, I will never get him again? Because it is very clear the one guy for me, it is Ezekiel Elliott. There was, I
Mm.
forget what year it was. It's probably 5 years ago now that I took him in the first round. It was one of his down years. And it was just, I was like, I'm not going there again. It was too much. I can't forgive him. So I've written him off. He's on my do not draft list forever. Is there anybody for you?
Yeah, well, there's no real opportunity to draft this guy anymore. This is going a little bit old school.
That's all right.
But Trent Richardson. Trent
Oh,
Richardson,
yeah.
especially as a Cleveland Browns fan.
Oh,
Yeah, that was a tough one.
that's a good one. Yeah, that's absolutely. And your Browns probably feel that way too.
Yeah.
And so, a couple other names last year, Travis Kelce didn't quite live up to the hype. Stephon Diggs. I'm a Panthers fan. Miles Sanders, absolutely. And then Jahan Dotson is somebody that I am
Yeah.
forgiving and targeting this year. So I want Jahan Dotson on my rosters this season. I think I'm going to forgive Trevor Lawrence. I think he's got too many weapons around him to be much better than he was last year. So with all of this, we have this choice to forgive, because when we're on the clock, we're either going to bring our grudges to the table and say, I'm not taking that guy, or we're going to say, you know what? I'm going to move past what happened last year. It was a mistake. They had a tough year. Show them grace and say, I'm going to take him again, and we'll draft him again. And so here's the encouragement for us today, especially as followers of Jesus. What does it mean to forgive? What does it look like to be forgivers in our day-to-day life? And here's what I am convicted of in a big way, is that as if we understand how much God loves us and the way that he has forgiven us, we absolutely forgive others. Like there's no argument. Like there's no excuse, there's no reason that we can come up with to say, I'm not forgiving that person. When we really understand it and put ourselves in humility to realize that Jesus has forgiven us in such a profound, meaningful way, that, I need to forgive my wife, as hard as it may be. Yeah, I forgive her. I got to continually forgive her. I got to forgive my daughters. And then we go further, the people that have really hurt us, let us down, the people that have, harmed us. Those are tough. Those are tough conversations. But in our heart, are we willing to let go of the bitterness and let go of the grudges that we hold on to, in order to experience freedom and in order to experience the true forgiveness and grace and rest in that God has shown us, to then experience that and show that to others? Man, we are called to it. We can live it out. And I'm with you on how hard it is, but look what it says in Scripture, Colossians 3:12 through 13, and then we'll get Garrett's thoughts on this as well. This is the Amplified version. It says, so as God's own chosen people who are holy, set apart, sanctified for his purposes, and well-beloved by God himself, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, which has the power to endure whatever injustice or unpleasantness comes, whatever comes, with good temper, bearing graciously with one another, and willingly forgiving each other if one has a cause for complaint against another. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so should you forgive. So there it is. That's what what we're called to as followers of Jesus. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so should you forgive. I don't know if that talks about fantasy, but just, are we willing to be forgivers and live this life as forgivers? So, Garrett, it's a big topic of forgiveness, but it's one of these key, principles as followers of Jesus. So what jumps out to you in your own journey of forgiveness?
Yeah, you're right when you say that this is one that's a little bit easier said than done. And I was mentioning to you beforehand, we have we run the children's ministry at our church, and we got together with a lot of fourth and fifth graders, and it's funny, timing wise, it kind of worked out beautifully. We were in Romans chapter 12 for part of our study last week, and it's easy when somebody does something to you. Our initial reaction as just fallen people is, I want to get them back worse. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them, but it's not our place. It's not what we're called to. In fact, Paul reminds us in verse 19 that Jesus or God says that vengeance is his and I will repay, says the Lord. And on the contrary, this is verse 20. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so while it would be so much easier to just repay what they did, give back what they gave, and maybe even twice as much or 3 times as much as what they did, because they need to feel that hurt. They need to feel that pain. That's not what we're called to. That's not our place. We have a God that takes care of that, and we need to trust that he's going to, and we need to do everything on our that we can on the opposite side to forgive and do our best to move on.
Amen. I love it. And really, it's such a detriment to our lives when we carry the anger and the bitterness of unforgiveness. It drags us down. It holds us back. It doesn't allow us to experience the peace and the freedom that comes with forgiveness. And you know, it's an ongoing process of healing. And sometimes there's an opportunity for reconciliation with certain relationships. But the option that we have to forgive and truly in our heart say, I'm not holding that against them anymore, that I'm not going to let that continually have a negative effect on me, man, it's huge. And the key too, we can't do this on our own. Like, we have to trust God to empower us. And that's why we have to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and the cross and know, man, his forgiveness toward me allows me and sets me up, and his power allows me to forgive. And so we have to remind ourselves of that too, that and ask God through prayer to say, God, please remove this bitterness. Help me forgive. Versus just saying, all right, I'm going to forgive someone. No, I mean, that's one step, but man, to really do it in a deep way that lasts, and we allow God to remove that bitterness from us. We need him to do it. We need his strength in a big way. So
No, absolutely. It's an interesting, like, quick little note. My father-in-law, he amazing pastor, leader, does incredible things, but he grew up like super antagonistic towards the church, anything of faith. And he had this kid that just every single week would invite him to church every week. And my father-in-law would make fun of him, tease him, whatever. And this kid would come back every single week. So finally my father-in-law was fed up, punched this kid right in the face.
Whoa.
Just punched him right in the face. He was done. He was like, I don't want to listen to this kid anymore. Kid comes back the very next week, invites him again to church, and forgave him for that, and was like, hey, I would love for you to come to church with me. And my father-in-law was like, oh my gosh, if you stop, I will go if you will stop asking me. And sure enough, my father-in-law gets saved, changes his life forever, my life forever, down through generations, because this kid was willing to forgive and move on. So sometimes you don't know that impact that you're going to have because of that forgiveness you have in your heart.
Wow, that's powerful, man. That's a wonderful perspective, because the people notice, wow, you're willing to forgive. That's real. Even them watching you forgive someone else, even if it's not that person, but people watching you live a forgiving life has a big impact too. So that's huge. Another verse to share, Mark 11:25. But when you are praying, first forgive anyone you are holding a grudge against, so that your Father in heaven will forgive your sins too. And so, we can't expect to ask for forgiveness from God if we're not willing to forgive the person that we're holding a grudge against. So that comes first. We forgive them, come before the Lord and ask him to forgive us for sins in our lives as well. And so as we think about the fantasy side of this, I think we miss out on certain players because we do hold a grudge against them. That there will be bounce back players this year. And sometimes, fantasy is unpredictable who that bounce back guy will be. But we may miss out on the fruit of taking a certain player because, well, I'm just holding a grudge against them. And so same with us. There are relationships, there are opportunities. Again, back to the freedom and the peace, that fruit in our lives, we miss out on that by holding on to anger, bitterness, and grudges and this unwillingness to forgive. And so the benefits of forgiveness are there. There's no doubt about it. So, again, it requires humility, patience, determination to continue to forgive, to once that the thought starts to creep back in, it's saying, God, take that. No, I've already forgiven that person. I'm not going there again. I'm not letting that bottle up again or appear again. And ultimately, we rest in the forgiveness that Jesus has shown us, his grace, his mercy. And that's what we cling to. So any final thoughts, Garret, on forgiveness?
No, I think you did it beautifully. It's a concept that I think we need to be reminded about often, because it's one of those things where we constantly have disappointments and frustrations and people that just rub us the wrong way in life, and constantly be reminded of how much we've been forgiven of. And I think when we're reminded of that, then it's so much easier to say, man, I got to move on. I got to love this person where they're at.
Amen. And I was challenged recently by a mentor, and he was saying to forgive even before it's acknowledged. Where even if somebody doesn't ask for forgiveness, forgiving them. And sometimes this is important in marriage, and
Oh, yeah.
just forgiving before even our wives acknowledge it. Just like, I'm not holding on to that, because it's easy for us, at least for me as a husband, to get frustrated. I can't believe my wife did that or didn't do that. And I'm going to get bitter. I'm going to get frustrated and hold a little grudge, and then withdraw, or, whatever my response is. Or am I willing to just forgive? No, I'm going to forgive. I'm not going to let this fester, and just be that forgiver. So it hits home in that regard as well. So there you go. I hope that's encouraging for everyone today. And that's this week's breakout. And we'll have breakouts all season long here on the podcast, and then also on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. So encourage you to become a free member today and get access to all of our breakouts. All right, Garret, we've got you on today for some fantasy advice as well. So we appreciate the spiritual insight, but also want to talk some fantasy rookies as well.
Yeah.
So you're looking at it from a dynasty perspective. So you can, of course, give that spin as well. But here's my question. Which rookies do you believe will have the biggest impact this season? So the guys that you're targeting to have an impact this year, who do you think those maybe top 3 guys will be?
Yeah, I think we got to take a look at the wide receiver position for a lot of the players in this class that are going to have the biggest impact year one. Specifically looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers. Both of these guys were drafted top 10 for a specific purpose. They play and win differently, but both guys are absolute studs. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr., who profiles as that true alpha X wide receiver. He can do basically anything you want him to do. He can go up and get the football. He can beat coverage deep. He runs good routes. He's strong at the catch point. Like, he's got the pedigree. He's got the name recognition, the good school, the draft capital, like anything that you would want. Marvin Harrison has it. And so I think you're going to be looking at a guy that is going to win, similar to what we've seen from DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams and guys that are those big physical alpha receivers. But then you have Malik Nabers, and Malik Nabers, he's a beast all his own. This is a guy that's going to run a lot more over the middle of the field, a big yards after the catch guy. Great speed, just a dynamic playmaker that when you get the ball in his hands, special things can happen. And so both of these players, I think there is a route for them to be wide receiver ones in their rookie campaign, which is hard to do. It's not something that we see all the time, but we've seen some top tier guys like the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases of the world. Those guys come in year one and have massive impacts for your fantasy football team. So I think those two guys are the most clear cut, obvious, like these guys could have huge impacts year one. And then go over to the number 1 overall pick in the draft this year in Caleb Williams. Great athlete. So you're going to get a little bit of rushing, but great upside as far as a passer too. This offense in Chicago is completely different than the offense that we've seen in the past. So many pass catching options, a much better line. They gave him a lot more than they ever gave to Justin Fields. And so I think in year one, if you're going to be you're in a one quarterback league and you're going to be waiting on quarterback, I think he's a really good option, especially if you pair him with kind of a safer veteran like an Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that, and you're waiting on quarterback. I think he's a really exciting upside option. So if I had to only pick 3 guys, those would be the 3 that I think will probably have the biggest fantasy impact year one.
Awesome. I'm always nervous taking the rookie wide receivers that early. So as early, I mean, you got to take Marvin Harrison early. So
Yep.
it makes me nervous, but I'm with you. The talent is there and the opportunity in a big way. Here are the 3 rookie running backs that I'm most excited about today. And I've been talking about Kimani Vidal all off season, and so I'm curious your thoughts on him, Garrett. But I love the talent, and I think he'll move up this depth chart over the next coming weeks, potentially, but definitely as the season gets going. I just don't trust J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards is a nice compliment, but Kimani Vidal is the guy that I want in that LA Chargers backfield. And then, man, we're already hearing about Josh Jacobs getting banged up in Green Bay. This Green Bay offense is going to be awesome. And like I said earlier, I can't forgive A.J. Dillon. So I got to go Marshawn Lloyd as the running back that I want in Green Bay. So I like his potential there. And then as a Panthers fan, I realize, this Panthers team is going to run the ball. And Jonathan Brooks, although he's injured now, he's coming back from a major knee injury. Apparently he's going to be ready week 3 or 4. I like that I know that because I can draft him with that in mind. And usually I don't like guys that I know are already going to miss weeks, but I know that he's going to come into this offense and be relied on and have plenty of opportunity and plenty of carries as the season goes along. I don't expect Miles Sanders to be what he was in Philadelphia. And Chuba Hubbard's a nice player too. Jonathan Brooks he was drafted early. This is who the Panthers want to be their star running back. And so those are the 3 running backs that I'm big on. What are your thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I think all those names are interesting to varying levels. We'll start with Jonathan Brooks, obviously the first running back off the board. Great pass catcher, elusive runner. Can do just about anything that you would ask him to do. So a great player. You just never know how these guys are going to fare year 1 after a knee injury. Usually it takes till year 2. So from a dynasty perspective, love Jonathan Brooks. We'll see how this year goes for him though. But you're right. I think he's going to get plenty of opportunity, especially late in season. I think that's when you're really going to be able to see what he has. The more time he has for that knee to heal, the more explosion and things like that will come back for Jonathan Brooks. Looking at Kimani Vidal, he was a late round selection, but that backfield is wide open. J.K. Dobbins is obviously an amazing talent, but we've struggled to see him regularly on the field with all of the issues he's had staying healthy. Gus Edwards, solid player. He's probably going to be the favorite to lead this team in touches, but these rookies, you never know with these guys. And so a dart throw at the end of your draft or something like that, guy absolutely worthy of keeping in mind. And then Marshawn Lloyd, I like Lloyd a lot from a talent perspective. I think he's a very, very talented running back. It's all going to depend on Josh Jacobs because they do tend to use multiple backs in Green Bay. So I do think we'll get to see Marshawn Lloyd. To what extent, it's all going to depend on Josh Jacobs. So definitely a good call there. A couple other running back names just to kind of keep in mind. Blake Corum, he was drafted by the Rams. Kyren Williams is going to be the guy, but they play very, very similar brand of football. But in fact, pre-draft, the guy I comped Blake Corum to was Kyren Williams. So they remind me a lot as far as style and ability go. Not fantastic athletes, but smart players that can read the field really, really well. Keep Trey Benson in the back of your mind. He is probably, from a talent perspective, I think he's my favorite running back in this class. I think he has everything that you would want for a superstar breakout running back. James Conner's already there, though. So how long is James Conner going to be in the way? We'll kind of have to wait and see. But Arizona, when they're willing to have a guy be their running back, he's their guy. They're not splitting a lot of touches. So eventually this is going to be Trey Benson's backfield. It's just a matter of when, not necessarily if. Last one to keep in mind, keep Jalen Wright on the back of your mind, another guy to draft a little bit later or priority with your waivers, because the two running backs ahead of him are dynamic guys. Devon Achane, I love. Raheem Mostert is a stud. Both of these guys are awesome, but it's an offense that is going to feed the running back. We saw both of these guys have huge numbers last year, but both have been known to get banged up and injured quite a bit. And so if either one of them goes down, Jalen Wright is cut from the same cloth, and he is a home run hitter waiting to happen. So just another name to keep in mind at the running back position.
Those are great. It's a good group of runners, even though, they went a little bit later in drafts, in the NFL draft. These guys are worth rostering in a big way. And Trey Benson, yes, let's go. But James Conner's getting so much love from training camp, which is interesting.
Yes.
The veteran getting the hype. So we'll see. But
it.
yeah, I think Trey Benson's a good one. All right, last thing. Again, because you're keeping an eye on the young guys, the second-year players that maybe are a little under the radar, or just in general, just second-year players that you're most excited to draft and target because of the impact that they're going to make this year. So, guys in their second season, who do you like?
Yeah, I'm really looking at Jayden Reid. Loved what he did last year in the Green Bay offense. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed, but we're kind of waiting to see who develops and evolves into that alpha receiver for them, the guy that's going to lead the team in targets, lead the team in yards. And I think that's most likely going to be a guy like a Jayden Reid. So big on Jayden Reid, a guy that I saw you had on your list. So I'll double down on it with you. Tyjae Spears, huge fan of Tyjae Spears as far as his talent, his ability. I think he is a game changer. When I gave my rookie grades, I gave him the same score as tied for the running back 2 in the class as Jahmyr Gibbs. And the Titans line was putrid last year. PFF had it as the worst line in football last year. It's better this year. They drafted J.C. Latham. And the biggest thing is they brought in Bill Callahan, who was the former Browns offensive line coach. And every stop he's gone, you see mediocre and waiver wire type offensive linemen turn into Pro Bowlers. And so he's going to improve that offensive line a lot. Tyjae Spears, I think, is going to have a monster season this year. And then as far as the last guy, I'll go with Anthony Richardson. This is a popular name for kind of a guy to break out this year. He was definitely on his way to breaking out last year, but the injuries are what derailed him. But if you're willing to play it a little bit risky, another guy where you might want to get a solid backup, a Brock Purdy or somebody like that for him, because the injury risk is very real. But when he's on the field, he could put up like quarterback 1 overall numbers when he's healthy.
Ooh, yeah, a lot of hype for Anthony Richardson. It just depends on where he goes in drafts. It might be a little too rich for me, but yeah, Tyjae Spears. And I saw that the Titans are listing Spears and Tony Pollard kind of 1A, 1B, or 1A. There's starters. They're both starting running backs. They're both going to be on the field a lot. I like both of them. I'm good having both of them on my roster. We talked about forgiveness earlier. I'm forgiving Tony Pollard and whatever happened in Dallas last year. He still was fine. He just didn't get into the end zone a lot. Not that the Titans necessarily will be scoring a ton of touchdowns, but I like both these guys kind of complementing each other. We've seen plenty of backfields that have 2 studs all season long. You mentioned the Dolphins. Here in Carolina, I'll never forget D'Angelo Williams, Jonathan Stewart's season.
Yeah.
So you've seen Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So you can have 2 stud running backs, and where you take Spears and Pollard, I think is pretty good value. So I'm with you on Spears though. And then I'm on the hype train for Dalton Kincaid. I think him being the top really weapon in the passing game there should be huge for Buffalo. And then I like Chase Brown as that underrated running back with opportunity in Cincinnati. I just think he'll be better throughout the season than Zach Moss. Brown's younger, second season. So excited about him as well. So any thoughts on Kincaid or Chase Brown?
Love the Kincaid call. We have a guy that he's one of my co-hosts, and he's got a good friend that's in the Bills organization, and it sounds like they are really going to be funneling their passing game through him. So definitely could be having a big breakout season. this coming year for Dalton Kincaid. So love that call. And then Chase Brown, I mean, dang, shoot for the upside. You're right. He's been getting a lot of love in camp. He's been getting a lot of first team reps. And Zach Moss, very, very solid player, but he's not gonna be a game changer. You might as well shoot for, especially at running back, shoot for upside. If you fail, you fail. Oh well. But give me as many of those lottery tickets as I can get.
That's right. I'm with you on that. All right, last thing. So you're a Browns fan. Give us some fan insight on the Browns this year and from a fantasy perspective and even beyond.
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I think it's going to be a really, really tricky season to roster a lot of Browns. You look at the wide receiver core. Amari Cooper's been great for the Browns past couple of years. David Njoku, great second half of the year last year. Tricky part is they've brought in another receiver in Jerry Jeudy. Elijah Moore's getting more involved in the offense. They've got Tillman and some other players that I think it's going to be a very crowded wide receiver core this year. And let's face it, even with specifically David Njoku, his big breakout was with Joe Flacco, not Deshaun Watson. So a lot of this is going to come down to what do we get out of Deshaun Watson? And Deshaun Watson, the guy that we saw in Houston, or is he the guy that we saw for the most part in Cleveland so far? So this is going to be a season where he's fully healthy. He's, well, I shouldn't say he's coming off that injury, but he should be fully healthy now. We started seeing a couple good games right before he got injured. So a lot of it's going to come down to him. Running back wise, it's really up in the air. We're waiting to see, is Nick Chubb going to be able to play? Is he going to be healthy? If not, how much is Jerome Ford or Donta Foreman going to be involved? So it's going to be a messy year for Cleveland Browns. So I'm not necessarily prioritizing Cleveland players in my fantasy drafts as much as I love them from a team perspective. But similarly to fantasy football, a lot of their success this season is going to depend on Deshaun Watson once again. If Deshaun Watson is the quarterback that we've seen, it's going to be a middle of the road year. It's going to be, we make it in as a wild card or we just missed the playoffs or something like that. Because our defense is legit. They'll keep us in games. But the offense is the big question mark. If he's playing like he did in Houston, I mean, we saw this team beat some really good football teams last year with Baltimore, and we beat San Francisco and some really good teams. So this could be a team that would push Kansas City in the AFC. So it all depends on what kind of Deshaun Watson we get this year.
Absolutely. That makes sense. It's going to be interesting. Yeah. I liked Njoku, but that's a good reminder of the Flacco connection. That's when he really thrived. It gives, that puts some hesitation. So that's good insight. I forgot. I didn't connect that dot. Well, cool. Well, Garret, man, love having you on today. Thank you so much for your willingness. I know this is a busy time for you. You got a lot going on. So we appreciate it and wish you the best from a fantasy perspective. But man, as a husband, father, and all that you have going on, following Jesus and living this journey, wish you the best, man, and stay in touch. And really appreciate you being a part of the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast today.
Absolutely. Had a great time. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Awesome. He's Garret Price. Check out dynastynerds.com. You can follow him on Twitter at dynastyprice and get all his fantasy insights there as well. For Garret, for my producer, Aaron, I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan who follows Jesus, a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. And I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected. And through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well. And I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. Let's be forgivers. Check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.